Since the dawn of the GAA in 1884, the telling of its stories have been just as important as the sports. Through the years, heroes and matches have been immortalised, inspiring generation after generation. But some of its most important stories have also gotten lost or turned into legend. And in this series, we will explore some of the GAA's most fascinating forgotten tales, separating rumour from reality and myth from the truth that is often more amazing than the fiction. I'm Michael Foley.
And I'm Ciaran O'Hara.
So join us for Over the Bar, exploring the histories of the GAA. Hello and welcome to our very first episode of Over the Bar, our GAA History Podcast. We're going to be here every week asking the big questions that we all probably actually think we know the answer to because they're just that familiar, but we actually don't. I'm Michael Foley and I've been working in GAA journalism for over 25 years. First the Sunday Tribune and now the Sunday Times. I've written a few books, most of them actually rooted in GAA history. The Kings of September, about the Kerry Offaly All-Ireland final 1982. Bloodied Field, about the events of Bloody Sunday in 1920 in Croke Park, and the Children of Croke Park, which also spoke about that event. They all drew me into this whole idea of kind of basically kicking over stones and finding stories. And often you'd find them and you mightn't have time to go back and really explore them. But this is what we are here to do, Ciaran. And you have been around almost as long as me, maybe even longer, maybe.
We've been working in parallel, Mick. Let's be honest. We've been working in parallel, though. I've been working more on the broadcast side of it, so on shows like Breaking Ball, on the GAA History series, part of what we are, on live GAA broadcasting for TG Cahir, RTE, Sky Sports, TV3. I've run the full gamut, and naturally in me that has created an interest in GAA history. I'm looking forward to finding the answers to these big questions.
Which is what we're going to do every week. We're going to take one major question, a mystery or a myth, turning point, and we're going to dig into it to find out what happened, why it mattered, and all of that good stuff to get a better understanding of that event and of the GAA itself, this thing that we live in.
And if you want to go even deeper, you can join our Cordial Club at overthebar.club, and there you'll get exclusive episodes and series, early ad-free access, and the chance to put your own questions to us.
So it was that time we said, especially late September, it's football final time. What was the maddest final you could possibly think of? And I couldn't get past the very, very simple question, which is, why was an All-Ireland football final played in New York?
Yeah, it's mad.
Why?
And it's prescient. We've got the NFL arriving in Croke Park this week, so let's find out how an All-Ireland final ended up in New York, and we have the perfect guest.
Absolutely, we do. We're joined today by Paul Fitzpatrick, who's a very well-regarded, tremendous journalist, works for the Anglo-Celt newspaper in Cavan. He's the author of the magnificently titled The Fairy Tale in New York, which tells the full story of how and why the 1947 All-Ireland football final between Cavan and Kerry ended up being played at the long-lost Polo grounds in New York. Paul, thanks so much for joining us for this. It's that time of year when, in another era, All-Ireland finals would have been on. And, when we were kicking around, like, what is the most iconic All-Ireland finals? The Polo grounds in New York, 1947, Cavan Kerry, and everything that comes with it is the one that jumps out. So if I could ask you first, right, I suppose, if you could give us the short answer to the longer question, is why? Why, in the name of everything that's holy, was there an All-Ireland final played in New York?
Well, to give you a very short answer, Mick, I would say it was because a rich West Kerry bar owner in New York didn't get to see a football match in 1946, and he decided that the mountains should come to Muhammad. That's the short answer. Now, there's a few jigs and reels within that, but that's the short answer.
Well, because what hits me is when I think about 47, and I just want to roll back very quickly, 60 odd years. Okay, now stay with me. The American invasion in the late 1800s, just after the GAA formed, is kind of the first, I suppose, GAA tour of sorts, a big major tour where they want to go over to America. They want to raise a load of money so they can run a Tailteann Games in 1889. They want to raise $5,000. Michael Davitt's idea of Land League fame and all the rest of it, Maurice Davin, who wrote the football rules, backs it up. It's a complete and utter catastrophe. So Dublin County Board only donate £5, for example. Fundraising games don't work in Ireland. Over 50 hurlers, athletes, officials go to America. Of those, at least 17 stay behind, including the new secretary of the GAA at the time, William Prendergast, James Mitchell, who will become a world champion weight thrower. Michael Davitt has to give him a loan of 400 odd quid to get home. And the whole thing almost bankrupted the GAA. And sort of that's the GAA's experience to 1947 of going to America, Ciaran. So
it did actually bankrupt poor old Michael Davitt.
It did. They never paid him back. So, like, it's amazing to me that by 1946 or so, that they're even thinking in these terms, Paul. Like, so how did it, like, to get to the nuts and bolts of it, where did this even start? Where did this mad idea even begin?
I suppose, like all mad ideas, you need a couple of mad people, and there were a couple of totally madcap, daft characters, I suppose, involved in this, but very, very capable and people that had an awful lot of means. And I suppose the two of those that spring to mind were John Kerry O'Donnell, who was the West Kerry, New York bar magnate who I mentioned, and then the other was Canon Michael Hamilton, who was a very influential cleric in the GAA, who came from Clonlara in Tyrone. So I can tell you the very origins of it, I suppose, if you want, which, as I mentioned, was 1946. So there had been a disastrous harvest in 1946. So late summer and into autumn in 1946 was very, very wet, torrential rain, to the point where the crops were lying in the fields, and there was a real fear that the harvest would fail, which would have been an absolute catastrophe at any time, particularly at that time, just coming out of the war. There was still rationing in place and so on. So it got so bad that the guards actually drove around the cities with loudhailers on the top of the squad cars, asking these townies to go out to the country and help save the harvest. Unpaid volunteerism. And they described the response as phenomenal. Thousands of people left the cities and went out to the country and helped save the harvest. So into that story comes this character, John Kerry O'Donnell. So he was obviously living in New York. He was a Kerry man from Clandonalt in West Kerry on the Dingle Peninsula. And he came home to watch the All-Ireland final between Kerry and Roscommon, which was a draw. So when he was there for the replay, he went to get the bus from Kerry up to Dublin to watch the game. And he met someone and they said, don't waste your time, the game was called off. So the game had been called off because of this massive natural emergency, this crisis to save the harvest. So the GAA made the decision to put the replay back. So John Kerry didn't get to see the game. So he immediately contacted his ally there, Canon Hamilton, who was the chairman of the Munster Council. And you couldn't overstate the influence he had in the GAA at the time. He actually had his own sort of slot at Congress every year where he was sort of devil air. And if he couldn't make it to Congress, someone else read out his address. You know, this was the influence the man had. So he was an ally of his. We contacted him and he said, we want the replay. And he kind of had to nicely say, well, look, the replay is going to be in Crow Park in a couple of weeks now. Just take it easy there. They decided maybe this could be possible. And over the course of that winter, they sort of stayed in constant contact. And they decided to put a plan together and bring the All-Ireland to New York.
I love the story of Canon Hamilton. And it's at the 1937 All-Ireland final, the commentary, where Micheál O'Hare, for whatever reason, is indisposed. So the Canon steps in. And I think it's Cavan. Cavan are involved. It's a draw. But the Canon, for whatever reason, he gets the score wrong.
This is the equivalent of like John Prenti stepping in for Marty Morrissey, is it?
A kind of thing. But this, he declares Cavan the winners on air. So, of course, Cavan goes wild, right, Paul? And then, there's bonfire celebrations, all this kind of stuff, until the supporters start coming home and saying, why? We drew. like we drew. But he seems to, it's almost like a reflection of his influence that he can kind of just ride over that, kind of almost absorb that and use it in some way, shape, or form to kind of, he's a bit of a charismatic character, very conservative clergyman, big supporter of the ban and all this kind of, and as you say, like has this kind of special celebrity star role at annual Congress every year. But the actual bringing of the idea to the Congress in Easter 1947, it starts in a very low-key way, doesn't it? It's like it's hardly even noticed. It's kind of mentioned at a Clare County Board meeting, and it kind of goes from there.
Yeah, that's how it started, really. Yeah, so obviously he was known for that boo-boo he made in 1937, and as you said, it didn't seem to knock anything out of him. He powered on anyway with his career. Now, he was a very serious man. It has to be
he
said.
wouldn't have to confess a lie in confession. It was a mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the bonfires were blazing in Cavan. But again, I like that because it shows that, 10 years before the Polo Grounds, communications were so sort of backward that you were waiting on people to arrive home from Dublin to give you the result of this game. And I always use the other comparator is in 1925, which is obviously 22 years before that, Cavan played Kerry in an All-Ireland semi-final in Tralee, and the first word back to Cavan was via carrier pigeon. So a few Cavan people had gone to Tralee to watch the game, and they released a pigeon with the scoreline attached to its foot or whatever. So the other story about that commentary was that 1937 game was famous for the rough treatment that the Kerry lads gave to some of the Cavan players, and there's a hilarious interview in the Irish press with Jim Smith, who was Cavan's almost mythical captain. And he was interviewed in his hospital bed on the day after the game. And he it's astonishing. He listed out his injuries, and I think he said his injuries were worse than Max Baer had picked up in his world heavyweight title fight. But it was quoted in the Anglo-Celt that when he went off injured, there was a 72-year-old man listening to Cavan Hamilton's commentary. A 72-year-old man called Patrick McCarran. And he dropped dead on the floor. And his last words were, "That finishes Cavan." It was a simplistic time, These people were just absolute heroes. So anyway, yeah, to answer your question, he brought the motion to the Clare County Convention, which I think was on January 19th. And it just slipped by. Nobody thought very much of it. And I think the way the motion was worded, it was more that the GAA should look to bring back the trips to America. Because as you mentioned, you obviously had the invasion 50 years earlier. But in the 1930s, it was a big thing. Irish county sides going to America. I know Cavan went 3 times in the 30s and played exhibition games all along the East Coast in Philly and New York and places like that. So that was how he sort of couched it. And then he got it as far as the Munster Convention. And that was the first mention of it being the centenary of Black 47. And it did make a little ripple in the Irish press. He was quoted as saying, "The present year is the centenary of Black 47, the year in which the Irish race was founded abroad." And he went on to say that something big was needed to restart Gaelic games in New York. But we will be there if we and they can find a way. So I don't know how serious people took it at that stage, but he had set the ball rolling, and he had got it through the county convention, he had got it through the provincial convention, and the next hurdle he had to cross then was Congress.
Love GAA history? Then you love going deeper with Over the Bar's Cordia Club membership. For just €5 a month, you'll get exclusive member-only episodes and series, early ad-free access to the main podcast, plus detailed show notes, a newsletter, and the chance to have your questions answered. Join Michael Foley and Ciaran O'Hara as they uncover the stories, the legends, and the questions that shaped our games. Don't just listen, be part of the club. Join now at overthebar.club.
And Ciaran, I want to put this to you, as the kind of, Paul is obviously emotionally invested in this. He's written the defining book on it. It's a huge moment in Cavan GAA history. But when you look at the circumstances here, right, you have John Kerry O'Donnell, who, by the way, has taken out the lease on what is now Gaelic Park in New York. It was Croke Park, right? But we're coming off the back of the Second World War when immigration had more or less stopped. So there wasn't a flow of players. Croke Park, Gaelic Park is a noose around his neck financially. GA in New York seems to be dying a death. So it's all it's lovely and very fair enough and appropriate maybe to talk about commemorating the Great Famine, Black 47, by bringing an All-Ireland final. But what's really going on here, do you think?
This is clear as day what's really going on. John Kerry O'Donnell is only getting to have dances in this thing he's got the lease on. He's the greatest showman. He needs to get something a massive event to re-kickstart Gaelic games. Like, Gaelic games outside of Ireland have stalled completely during the Second World War. Teams can't get hurleys, footballs, the basics. And then on top of that, as you say, emigration has stalled completely because there's been no emigration. There's been a lot of refugeeism during the Second World War, but there hasn't been emigration. I'd say he sees this as the moonshot. If he can get an All-Ireland final to New York, maybe, as happened on the previous invasion, a few of them hang around and he's got some headline acts for that theatre of his in the Bronx.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that's what struck me as well. This is a shot to try and revive you. And to be fair, it is mentioned in Dublin as well that, reviving the games in America is important. People might think that, anyone who's ever come across annual GAA Congress will wonder how anything interesting can ever really happen there, apart from, you read the decision and go, oh, that's some things are interesting. But this particular Congress, Paul, where Canon Hamilton brings the motion, not to go to New York, but to explore the idea of going to New York. To me, I mean, I've been covering Congress for 25 odd years, and I tell you, this one just sounds bananas. Because you have, it starts at 10 in the morning, it breaks for the Railway Cup matches in Croke Park at 2 o'clock. But because the Canon is delayed, am I right? They say, we will do the motion on New York. Not that anyone expects it to pass anyway. We'll do that after the Canon arrives and the games are done after 4 o'clock. But from there begins a Congress that the nature of which I couldn't even conceive of ever happening.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Yeah, so it was very messy already long before this.
I love the notion they broke for the Railway Cup finals. Was it in Croke Park, this Congress?
It was in Croke Park. It was in a cramped room under the stand.
Yeah, they were chatting about the prospects for the New York motion, during the match. And they were kind of the matches, and they were kind of going, he doesn't stand a chance. I think, am I right, Paul? Paddy O'Keefe, the GA secretary at the time, was actually going around going, will you just, to a few people going, just give him a few sympathy votes. Just vote yes, because we don't want to embarrass the great man.
That's exactly right, yeah. And he was very friendly with O'Keefe, because it was O'Keefe who had contacted him the day before that 1937 All-Ireland final to ask him would he commentate on it when the commentator was unavailable. So he was an ally of his.
Oh, so Pádraig O'Keefe was the Director General of 2RN at the time as well.
He was calling the shots everywhere.
So obviously there had been extremely bad weather early in 1947, because it had started to snow sort of at the end of January. And at one stage it snowed almost continuously for 40 out of 50 days or something like that. At one stage there was the worst blizzard of the 20th century arrived towards the end of February, where there was 50 hours of continuous snow. So the country came to a complete standstill. I mean, it was an insane year,
mental.
So,
maybe they were just thinking, let's have an All-Ireland final in New York because it won't be snowing.
That's reasonable. Seems reasonable.
So as you said, it was Easter Sunday when Congress was held. So obviously a busy time for the men of the cloth. So he was delayed in with his priestly duties in Clare. So it was agreed that they would hold off until after the match and after this Railway Cup final to discuss this motion. And by the time he got there, he arrived halfway through the match, and a fellow delegate came up to him and said, "Look, you're wasting your time. This is hopeless." And there was another guy called Seamus Gardner, who I think possibly came from Waterford, later became GAA president. And he went straight up to the Canon and said, "I can't support you with this." And the Canon was quoted as saying, "The motion is going through." And that was it.
It's already decided, lads. You just sit
was
back
was the Canon related to Sherlock Nan? We're going to win it. Yeah.
You could be right, yeah. At the time he was parish priest in Newmarket on Fergus, but he originally came from Clonlara. So anyway, it came to his time to speak, and they shoved it into this pokey little room, and there was a big crowd there. The delegates were getting cold, they were getting tired. It was stuffy. It had gone on a long time. They knew it was snowing heavily, and they had to get in their cars and drive back down the country. And then the canon started to talk, and he spoke for 20 minutes without notes, and he sort of invoked Corey Pearce in the way he spoke. Like, it was just short of sort of blood sacrifice to Mother Ireland here, sort of thing. He said, all I ask today is that this Congress gives its sanction to the principle and empower the Central Council to make the tremendous gesture to help our fellow Gaels in exile in their efforts to preserve the continuity of their racial characteristics, and so on. He talked about a rising generation of Irish Americans and the pastimes of the motherland. And as it went on, he added the line, "Strong hearts will throb with emotion, that only those who have been in exile can appreciate."
Whoa.
Are you going
A little bit of Barbara
this?
Cartland there, was it? A little bit of Barbara Cartland in there as well. Mills and Boone, strong hearts throbbing.
So what sealed it for him was he had an ally from Milltown Malbay in West Clare, a delegate called Bob Fitzpatrick, and he got up and read a letter from an immigrant, which he said he had received this letter from a Irish person who was living in New York, would never get home, begging for this little piece of Ireland to be brought to New York. And it was said that there were actually tears spilled. Some of the delegates actually started to weep when they heard this letter.
That could have been the cold, in fairness.
He later admitted that he had written the letter himself in Barry's hotel.
No wonder Canon Hamilton was confident. He just fabricated evidence, or got guys to fabricate evidence for him to make sure it gets through. Like,
it was said then that, as if by magic, a forest of hands appeared, and so everyone started to suddenly support this motion after the letter, and then others had been sort of encouraged to support it so as not to embarrass Canon Hamilton. So against all odds, it was 2:00 in the morning at this stage, and against all odds, it had passed the hurdle of Congress. Now, that didn't mean it was going to New York. It still had to be passed by Central Council. So what they did then was they sent Paddy O'Keefe and Tom Kilcoyne, who I think was from Sligo, Conry and Sligo. They were sent to New York to explore, was this thing viable at all?
So at this point, and by the way, just to finish on the Congress, like, that conversation probably started about 5:00 in the evening, say after the canon arrived and whatnot, and doesn't finish until 2:00 in the morning. Like, it's an incredible debate, an incredible kind of, you can imagine the lads coming out into the snow exhausted and probably not entirely aware of what they've done here. So, like, you've now got Paddy O'Keefe, as you say, and Tom Kilcoyne off to New York. First issue, Ciaran, is liner tickets. Not everyone is going to be able to go on the boat, so they're going to have to use the not entirely trustworthy airline option. People are not overly happy flying, but they're going to get around that. Now it comes to finding a venue. And to be fair, and it's a tribute to your commitment to the research to this podcast episode in particular, that you went and found a picture of the two options that the GAA went now. So did they go to enormous lengths looking for a venue, Ciaran?
Well, I'll put it this way. If they swam across the Harlem River, it would have been exhaustive. But the two stadiums are literally either side of a riverbank.
So we're talking...
They crossed the bridge. They went to New York and they went to Yankee Stadium, which plainly because of the shape of the stadium wasn't suitable. And they crossed the bridge and looked at the Polo grounds. And that was the extent of it. And the Polo grounds, while it was more suitable, it's still a somewhat odd shape.
It's possibly the first and only, well, it is hopefully, apart from the 1880s, 1890s maybe, where an All-Ireland final is played on a pitch that's almost like a triangle. Because, Paul, we have, by your dimensions in the book, it's 137 yards by 84 yards at one end, and it's 137 yards by 71 yards at the other end. Keeping in mind, by the way, Croke Park is at this point 155 by 80. So it's smaller, but wider, but narrower.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you had, of course, the pitcher's mound on it as well.
Oh yeah, of course.
And it brings new meaning to, defend narrow, attack wide.
Depending on what half it is.
Love GAA history? Then you love going deeper with Over the Bar's Cordia Club membership. For just €5 a month, you'll get exclusive member-only episodes and series, early ad-free access to the main podcast, plus detailed show notes, a newsletter, and the chance to have your questions answered. Join Michael Foley and Ciaran O'Hara as they uncover the stories, the legends, and the questions that shaped our games. Don't just listen, be part of the club. Join now at overthebar.club.
One thing I want to just jump on before we go into the trip and all the rest of it is the how it gets the nod. I think this is brilliant. So there's a central council, as Paul mentioned, there's a central council meeting has to be held to rubber stamp. After the lads come back with their, okay, we can do it in the Polo grounds, it's going to cost it. The rent was like $5,000, I think about £1,250 at the time. Cost to bring over a party of 60 or 70, I think it was about £15,000 or so like that. So there has to be a central council meeting. Are we going to do this? Oh, by the way, the reaction nationally is, Paul, it's awful, isn't it? There's like, it's not greeted as a magnificent gesture to our American brethren.
Yeah, it's not just negative, it's actually angry. So there's a lot of people quoted speaking at county board meetings and so on, and they were genuinely mad about it. The Wexford chairman, who was a Mr. O'Kennedy, he warned that there'd be a revolution in the county if Derby couldn't see the match.
He's invoking 1798.
In Dublin, they had a vote, and there were 26 votes, and it was 21-5 to demand that it wouldn't go to New York. Fermanagh, Roscommon, they all voted against it. In Galway, JJ Nestor, who lent his name to the Connacht Cup, he made a very salient point. He said it never would have been passed if Congress had heard the motion at midday instead of late at night, which is probably true.
I think here's a point.
And some of the letters into the newspapers were brilliant. There was a letter into the Kerry man, signed by 3 Kerry turf workers in Kildare, and they said that they were dumbfounded, and they said that Kerry men everywhere think of All Ireland final day as the one day in the year when they will travel to Dublin. We would assume miss the puck fair as missed this.
Gee, some things ever change. My favourite one actually was the Roscommon Herald ran a poll, and there was 1,700 respondents to the question, was it a good idea or a bad idea? And the result was 1,699 to 1 against. And
Well, was that verified by Stokes Kennedy Crowley?
yeah, if that's a firm of solicitors in Strokestown or somewhere maybe, but the central council meeting. So that's the backdrop. So you're coming into the central council meeting. It's held in camera, which is interesting. That means no press, so they can have an open debate, as it were, and kind of really. So it's relatively informal, but the proposal to take the All Ireland to New York is rejected by a narrow majority. So if that happened now, that would be it. There will be a press release sent out, and there will be no more. But in 1947, they say, well, we have to have a version of this meeting now in front of the press. So let us now, kind of, we've had the dress rehearsal. Let's go public and just do what we got to do. It's meant to be a rubber stamping exercise, but instead, the motion ends up coasting through. I don't know, Paul, what happens here.
There was a New York or nowhere effort in between these two meetings.
I don't know. It gets through 25-12. Unbelievable.
I think one of the things that they said that really helped shift the tide was Dan O'Rourke was the president of the GAA. He was also a TD in Roscommon, and a very, very influential man. Now, he had a son playing on the Roscommon senior team. And one of the comments he made when the press came into the room, now, whether he was a blowhard type or what, I don't know, but it does seem not a very judicious thing to say. But he said, no son of mine will fly to America. And that seemed to piss people off in the room, because they were kind of thinking, it's okay for Kerry to say
that just damned Roscommon's chances in the 47 championship anyway.
As it turned out, they got out of Connacht, and Cavan beat them in the semi-final, so he wasn't too far off. But I think that annoyed people, and Paddy McFlynn, who was a 29-year-old delegate at the time, future GAA president, he was quoted in an interview about this in 97, and he sort of pinned it on that. He said Dan O'Rourke said the wrong thing, and people were like, sort of said, we'll give him 2 fingers. So it got overturned. So suddenly they had to go to New York, and this was actually happening.
When you think of, like, just even already, okay, so we get on now to the trip and everything, but what's got them here? An impassioned appeal by the canon, but also a fake letter, and now a misplaced remark, a very, very injudicious remark by a GAA president has annoyed people, and now we're going to New York. I still find it extraordinary that this thing even got this far. But now we're at the point where I think it's 25 lads are going by boat, 35 are going by air. The West Kerry men and anybody with any fishing experience go by boat because it's going to be less upsetting for their tummies, I suppose. The flight, Paul, you can tell us about the flight, but there's 2 things I want to ask you about. 2 people I want to ask you about. First of all, if you could tell us quickly the story of Patrick McGovern in New York when the boat arrives, the Mauritania arrives. And Patsy Lynch, is Patsy Lynch a Cavan player? He meets his wife on the trip, does he?
Yeah, Patsy Lynch was chairman by 47, but he still holds the record as the youngest man to play in an All-Ireland final. He played in the junior All-Ireland final, which Cavan won in 1927 when he was 16. And he was a folk hero, Patsy Lynch. He was still quite a young man at this stage. He was only in his mid-30s. He was a butcher based in Sandymount at the time, but he met this lady on the boat over, and he ended up marrying her. But the story about Patrick McGovern was one that I unearthed by chance when I went to New York to do a few interviews, and I went out to Cranford in New Jersey to meet the sons of Owen Rowe McGovern, who was one of the Cavan players on that trip, who had sort of made a life in New York after that. And like a lot of those players, actually, his descendants really excelled in sport, but unfortunately, they were all gone from Cavan. Like, he would have had a granddaughter who played a really high level of soccer, representing the United States underage, that sort of stuff. His son was a really good college American footballer. I always had that theory that Cavan lost a lot of those people, and they're good genes as well after that. But anyway, when I spoke to them, they were telling me the story, which was that Owen Rowe came from a big family in Swanland Bar in West Cavan, which would have, to this day, probably is a more deprived area in terms economically and stuff like that. Not as much employment, a lot of depopulation, and that was always kind of the way. It's geographically it's a big area, but there were only 3 players from West Cavan on the panel in 47. One of them was Owen Rowe. So to cut a long story short, I don't think he had ever actually met his brother Patrick, or he had maybe met him when he was 5 or 6, but he couldn't remember him because he was one of the eldest, and he had emigrated and he was living just outside New York. So when Patrick had got a letter from Swanland Bar to say that the Cavan team were coming, he was waiting on the docks. But he had to go around asking people, "Are you Owen Rowe McGovern? Are you Owen Rowe McGovern?" And finally, someone says, "Do you know Owen Rowe McGovern?" And Owen Rowe said, "That's me." And he said, "Well, I'm your brother," which was an amazing story.
It's brilliant. I think, Ciaran, we can be as cynical as we like about John Kerry O'Donnell's need to pay the mortgage and all the rest of it, and the need to get the game over. But there is something worthwhile in bringing a match like that when you hear a story like that. And I'm sure there was more.
Yeah, well, I'd imagine that was replicated across the 2 panels, because you would probably have had a huge amount of, the very fact that it was a Kerry man who'd been the initial promoter, there's huge emigration from both areas. But I mean, those boys were on the ship, okay? The lads on the plane, it's no wonder some of them didn't come back. The flight was terrifying.
Yeah, you're right, Ciaran. Yeah, first of all, I suppose there was a debate: should we even send the best of Irish manhood on the plane, because they weren't fully sure that this was particularly safe. So there was a lot of debates about that, and Cavan had Willie Doonan, who had fought in World War II and on the Allied side, and had been shot down in North Africa in a plane. He just point blank refused to travel by plane, and there were a couple of others who were afraid to travel by plane. But the GAA felt that it was an important vote of confidence in Renana Airport, or Shannon Airport as it became known after, and in sort of, it was seen as the progressive thing to do, that the GAA can't really go, well, hold on now, the country is getting behind air travel here, and we're sort of backward and afraid to get on a plane. So they went for it, but they were worried about it. So the flight itself took 29 hours. So imagine now, like, we go over there now in 6 or 7 hours.
29 hours would get you to Sydney.
They had several stops along the way. They stopped in the Azores, and they stopped several times for refueling. They had to stop in Boston where they met they didn't get off the plane, I think, in Boston, but they met one of the Kennedy clan. They got up on the plane to meet them. So it was an unbelievable sort of a odyssey to get there. Apparently the turbulence was, if it was now, I think it'd be going viral on social media. If people had to deal with the sort of turbulence they dealt with. Apparently it was absolutely insane. And some of them were scarred by it. Some of them said for years after, like, it was a terrifying experience.
They had the rosary beads out at night.
They had, yeah, that's right, yeah.
You also had, like, am I right in saying that they lost contact with air traffic control for a stretch?
Yes, they did. Yeah, they did. And then when they got to
was that somewhere around Bermuda?
Jeez, they're gone way off track.
The whole flight was an absolute nightmare, and they were delighted to touch down. And then obviously they were able to come back by sea. So there was no flight coming back. So I think John Joe O'Reilly and his wife flew the following morning with one or two others. But there were only, apart from the players and the few officials. And interestingly, all of the officials who had spoken out against it went on the trip. We have to remember the one man who stuck to his principles was Alf Murray, who was the Ulster Council president at the time. He said, "No, I'm not going. I was against it, so I'm not going to take the soup here and get my free trip to New York." But yeah, they were glad to get there.
Love the free episodes of Over the Bar? Then take your passion further with the Cordia Club membership. For €5 a month, you'll unlock bonus series and member-only shows, hear the podcast first and ad-free, and get behind-the-scenes access through detailed notes, a newsletter, and Q&As. It's the ultimate GAA history experience, curated by Michael Foley and Ciaran O'Hara just for you. Upgrade your listening, support the show. Join today at overthebar.club.
So when we get there, like, it's amazing. I suppose maybe it's not amazing when you think of, like, New York was such an Irish city at the time. It had Ciaran, it had a Mayo man.
It had a Mayo man as mayor.
Bill O'Dwyer.
How do we replicate these circumstances? The mayor of the biggest city in America was a born and bred Bohola man, William Dwyer.
I know. What a time to be alive in New York. And, like, he's obviously there, so that's big. City Hall, there's a huge reception for him. There's a ticker tape parade, which I think is incredible. I mean, there must have been people going, why? Who are these lads? It's like an enormous cortege of cars going down, like, through the middle of Manhattan, and the ticker tape was coming down, and it's great, and it's fantastic, and their heat is incredible, and they go up on the, I think, Kerry train at what we know as Gaelic Park, still called Croke Park then. They train in Gaelic Park. Cavan are in Van Cortlandt Park, which is, I think, next.
It's just across the road, yeah.
Yeah, it's just across the way. Team hotels are swamped. It's very hard to get any space to prepare for an All-Ireland final, really. The Kerry team are invited by the New York Athletic Club, which is the very well-heeled, very, very well-ordered, well-off kind of athletic institution in New York City. They're brought out to Travers Island, their lovely, no doubt, wood-panelled HQ.
They're out of town clubhouse, yeah.
They're out of town clubhouse. But the interesting thing, lads, that I noticed, that when Paddy O'Keefe and Tom Kilcoyne went to the Polo grounds, I can only imagine that they were looking up mostly, because it doesn't seem like they looked down at what the players were going to have to be playing on, Paul. It's pretty rough.
I was extremely rough, and we saw that because a few players went off injured in the game. The ground was like concrete. Now, it was conditions that they weren't used to at home, but even the build-up to it, like, it was a complete carnival atmosphere. When they appeared at City Hall, a crowd of 2,000 people showed up on the steps of City Hall to greet them. And O'Dwyer, who you mentioned, he was known in the papers as, he had a couple of monikers. One was the Gang Smasher.
Yeah, he took down Murder Incorporated.
Yeah, he had a really interesting life, because he was educated at St. Nathan's in Ballahadreen and was going for the priesthood. And I think he went and studied in a Jesuit seminary in Spain, and then backed out of that. And when he was 20, he went to New York, and he ended up working as a deckhand on boats. And sort of put himself through night school, advanced to become DA, and then he became mayor, and the papers called him the boy who put the R in Mayo. So he got up at City Hall, and he said that he started off by saying when the Dodgers win the National League, which is all he had to say, and the crowd went absolutely wild. He continued by saying, if we were to suggest playing the World Series outside Brooklyn and taking it to Ireland, I would not accept responsibility for the peace of this city.
So even he thinks this is bonkers. He thinks this is insane.
Even he thinks it's nuts. There was an interesting little subplot to it. So there was a lady called Anna Kelly who was a colour writer for the Irish Press, and they took the decision to send Anna Kelly to cover the trip, which apparently caused a lot of rancor at the time within the paper, because there was probably a degree of sexism, and also she wasn't on the GA beat. But it was an inspired decision because she sent back some brilliant colour pieces. Now, they were slightly twee, I suppose, in some ways, but she did sort of capture some of the colour. So there was one bit, I'll read you a little bit of it. This is the mood around the hotel and around the camp where the players were. From the sidewalks, Irish voices cheered, Irish faces smiled, wistful faces, happy faces, all lighted with love for the country that will always be home. Women wept and waved handkerchiefs. How's the turf at home? Some cried. Ah, 'tis fine and dry.
Yeah, it's grand. It hasn't snowed this year.
This week.
Two nuns. Someone says, anyone here from Cork, Galway, Mayo, and so on. Two nuns thrust forward. Any Killarney boys here? Teddy Sullivan replied. Now don't let Kerry down, said the little nuns. You can imagine the scene. It was an absolute carnival. How you would prepare for an All-Ireland final, I have no idea.
I get the impression that it didn't really, and we'll get on to it maybe afterwards, that it didn't really dawn on fellas what they were actually involved in, to the degree it might if they were at home. But Ciaran, as a broadcasting man, as a man with many years' experience in that field, tell me what would be your reaction if you rocked up the Friday before an All-Ireland final with your commentator to have a look at the press box, or look at the broadcasting booth, I should say, and you find it's just a bare room, there's not even a wire in it. Nothing has been plumbed in. There is no option here for a commentary.
I've had this happen to me once, and I nearly died. So I can't imagine how Micheál O'Hare felt, having had all of the expense of getting to New York and being the only way the population at home can connect with the game, to find out that I have no means of actually getting in touch with them. It's
incredible. It's amazing. Like, Radio Éireann were slow enough anyway to cover the event, but eventually they said if the GA will basically pay for O'Hare to go over, we'll sanction his trip. But they hadn't sanctioned the purchase of the line that was necessary. So eventually, by the end of Friday evening, AT&T and Radio Éireann had come to an arrangement, and the line was plumbed in. But the story had made the papers back home, so there was confusion all the way into Sunday as to whether the thing would be.
Can you imagine all the panic, all the fellas that have got their wet batteries sorted for listening to the All-Ireland final, and then you read in the papers that it's actually not going to be broadcast?
It would have been, Paul, it would have been actually catastrophic for the whole concept, wouldn't it, if it hadn't have been broadcast?
It would have been, because that's one of the big sort of stories that came out of it, that there were thousands of gatherings around the country where there might be just one wireless in a townland or in a village or whatever, and the householders would put it on their windowsill, and the whole area would come along and sit. And there were stories, not just in Cavan, but all around the country in the newspaper archives. There were stories of dozens and dozens of people turning up to stand outside houses to listen to the game. The game threw in at 8 minutes past 3, so it was 8 minutes past 8 in the evening in Ireland, September 14th. So probably a decent enough evening. It wasn't just winter yet, and it was an absolute festival atmosphere around the country. So if the broadcast hadn't actually made it on the air, the whole thing would have been a disaster. So after all the hurdles that jumped, that one still could have brought it down.
It's incredible. Again, the fine margins in this thing are amazing to me when you go through it. It sounds, as matches go, as All-Ireland finals go, the first half sounds like a classic. The little bit of footage that we have on YouTube, it looks like a classic. Kerry fly out of the blocks, get 7-8 points up. Cavan rally, and they're actually, Paul, they're 3 up by half time, and the game seems to be turned their way. It's all good.
Who's playing into the narrow end?
Love GAA history? Then you'll love going deeper with Over the Bar's Cordia Club membership. For just €5 a month, you'll get exclusive member-only episodes and series, early ad-free access to the main podcast, plus detailed show notes, a newsletter, and the chance to have your questions answered. Join Michael Foley and Ciaran O'Hara as they uncover the stories, the legends, and the questions that shaped our games. Don't just listen, be part of the club. Join now at overthebar.club.
Yeah, there's a famous switch Cavan made where they moved John Wilson and PJ Duke. So Wilson had started at midfield and Duke had started wing back. Wilson went on to be future Taoiseach. But anyway, Wilson was playing midfield and he was struggling. And the move that supposedly changed the game was PJ Duke went to midfield. Duke was a brilliant attacking half-back that could play midfield. And that turned it because Kerry were running away with it early on. Cavan got a goal back from Mick Higgins. They got another from Joe Stafford, who was a rambunctious corner forward on the Cavan team. There was an announcer announcing the game as it went on. And I think he gave the goal to someone else. And walking off the field at half-time, Stafford had a bone to pick with him. Like, he was that type of figure. So it was an extraordinary cast of characters. But Cavan turned things around and won the game fairly well. Kerry are still sore about it now, I have to say, the old-timers.
It is amazing, It's like all great teams and great players. They dwell on the defeats far longer than they do the victories. So 47 would have rankled for a long, long, long time, probably up to 82. And then on to 2011, since has always been the touchstone for Kerry in terms of the ones that got away. But 47, they had 2 goals disallowed. They cracked a shot off the crossbar. Bat Garvey, a name from yesteryear, from a long time back, obviously was, but still a famed name in Kerry, was outstanding. Peter Donoghue from Cavan, man of the match. The Kerry backs wore baseball caps. Keep the heat off. You can see it in the footage. They're all their little hats on.
The one I'm fascinated though is Eddie Dowling.
Oh yeah, poor Eddie. So Eddie's going great in the game for Kerry, but the pitcher's mound that we mentioned briefly earlier on, it was not removed for the match. So the poor misfortune, he banged his head off the pitcher's mound at one point and gets taken off concussed. So Kerry have all sorts of kind of bones to pick with the misfortune and the outcome of the game and the referee and all the rest of it. But 4 points in it at the end. Famously, of course, we go back to the broadcast. O'Hare, Paul, you mentioned there, it's 8 minutes late starting, so there's 5 minutes to go. And they're running out of time.
They've booked time. They've only booked so much time on the line.
So he's saying, he's down the line going, live on commentary going, please just give us 5 minutes more. Please give us 5 minutes more. Which, thanks be to God, they did. So the celebrations afterwards.
If that had been cut off, how would they have got word to Cavan about the result?
Well, I mean,
there's no carrier pigeon on earth that would have carried that message.
Even the cannon couldn't have, it would have put the cannon's error in the halfpenny place if they couldn't have even reported the result. But huge celebrations back home. And this is where I think, lads, I don't know what you think, but this is where it dawns on everybody how big this was. So there's a lovely week of touring, it sounds like, in America. They come home in London, big reception. But it's at the Mansion House in Dublin, Paul, where there's a huge crowd gathers. Cavan are in full-on celebration mode. But the Kerry lads realise, some of them say, don't they, when it's in Dublin at the Mansion House, they realise what they've lost here.
That's it, yeah, because Mick Higgins was quoted as saying that they had no idea of how big it was until they got home. Now, they had got some newspapers from home delivered to them in London when they arrived on the train in London, but they still had no idea that the stir this had caused. And it was only when they really reached home and saw the crowds and saw the whole fuss that had been created. Just on the thing about the referee and Kerry's sort of hard luck story in New York, the conspiracy theory was that the game was becoming so one-sided that the referee decided to give Cavan some soft decisions.
82 all over again. They said the very same in the last 10 minutes. They said that PJ McGrath, the referee from Mayo, gave Offaly some soft frees just to take the rough look off the scoreline.
Yeah, that's what they said about 47. And the referee was Martin O'Neill, who was a very famous official. And he had actually refereed the 1933 All-Ireland final, but hadn't refereed in years. The GAA had sort of took him out of retirement and brought him back because I suppose he was well connected and well respected. But yeah, when they got back, they were fated, and it was interesting. They were brought to City Hall on the Monday after the game, and then one story I like is that on the Tuesday, some of the military men on the teams went out to West Point Academy. So you had John Joe O'Reilly and Simon Dignan on the Cavan team and Joe Keohane on the Kerry team, who are officers in the Irish Army. So they went out to West Point and were absolutely fated. This was Irish Army officers leading international athletes over here. So the young recruits, or whatever the word is, in West Point, were really taken with these Irishmen. They were up speaking Irish and so on. So it was I suppose it was sort of the early decades of the Irish state as well. So you had these fellas, like the John Joe and Keohane and those guys, they were sort of godlike, almost deities at this stage. So yeah, when they got back, they were fated around the country. And one of the things, which I'm sure before you say it, I'll say it would have gone down well with the Cavan lads, was one of the presents they got was a wallet of notes. They would show up at a homecoming. You might have Granard, actually, I think was said to be the biggest homecoming that the Cavan team had on their mini tour, even though it wasn't in County Cavan. But one of the Cavan players, Paddy Smith, was working down there, and he was an extremely popular character. The team would get a wallet, and it would be crammed with notes, and that was your sort of memento. Where now they might get a bit of crystal or something like that.
You can't put crystal in the petrol tank, can you? It's the reality there. Like, in terms of money, actually, Ciaran, we're talking about Polo Grounds about 60,000 capacity.
I think so, around that time, yeah. And I mean, they didn't fill it. It was just under 35,000. And in our members only episode this week, we're looking at the Wembley tournaments. Like, the Wembley tournaments would have routinely got bigger attendances than that, but this was an All-Ireland final.
Did they overprice it? The price was pitched somewhere between $2.40 and $7, which was a hell of a lot more than you would have paid for a ticket in Croke Park. So maybe that didn't help. I think John Kerry O'Donnell said some nefarious forces kept saying it was a full house, so fellas didn't bother going over to see could they get in, which was, I can't believe that would have happened. That sounds very skulldugerish.
So the ticket prices were what, $2.40 to $7.
Yes.
Let's take a mean of $4 a head. Like, the gate here is it's 160, 170 grand.
Yeah, and in comparison to the American invasion that I mentioned before, it's a huge success on every level. Like, they make over £10,000 of profit. As far as I know, most everybody comes home. The All-Ireland Championships aren't collapsed in 1948. And, and the GAA in America gets exactly the boost it wanted. And John Kerry O'Donnell gets the momentum to build an empire that he rules pretty much like Caesar for the next 40 to 50 years, which causes huge conflict with the GAA, which is maybe a story for another day.
That's over a longer term. In the short term, they do go back to the Polo Grounds, don't they, Paul?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they kept bringing things to the Polo Grounds, but the stadium itself, or the area itself, became very rough. And then there was a man shot there. So, and that's an interesting story in itself, because the guy had attended a baseball game there, and a young boy, a 14-year-old in the neighborhood, had found a rifle, and he said there was one bullet in it, and he said he'd save it until the 4th of July, when the fireworks would be going off, that he would go to the roof of the tower that his family lived in, and he would fire this bullet. Just a kid that had found a gun and had it as a toy, and he thought, I'll fire the shot when the fireworks are going off and it won't be heard. And it traveled about 1 kilometer, and it struck this man sitting in the Polo Grounds. It struck him in the temple, and he died. And the whole that sort of finished it off. The whole area had got very rough, and over time, then they ended up closing down the stadium. And it's now a housing project. I visited it when I was in New York a few years ago. And
in terms of Cavan, so we know that Kerry, the Kerry story goes on. It goes on. Cavan are in the middle, or maybe at the beginning of a golden era. Like, they retain the All-Ireland the following year. They fall short in the All-Ireland final in 50. What's the legacy here, Paul, of the Polo Grounds for Cavan?
It's interesting, I sometimes think Cavan would be better off, and this is an unpopular thing to say, I sometimes think Cavan would be better off had they not enjoyed all of that success in the first half of the 20th century, because it definitely is a weight on the shoulders of Cavan now, because there is a sense of exceptionalism there that it's not really rooted in reality. Cavan were a brilliant team 70, 80 years ago, but times move on. So I don't think it has helped Cavan in that sense, while it's lovely to look back at it. in terms of that particular team, they retained the All-Ireland in 1948 and they also won the National League. So they were an all-time great team. They were beaten in the All-Ireland final in 49. In 1950, they lost PG Duke, who was only 25, outstanding player who I mentioned earlier. He died after a short illness. That knocked the stuffing out of them a little bit. And they were beaten in Ulster in 50 and 51, which was unusual for Cavan at the time because Cavan had such a dominance in Ulster at the time. They had never actually trained for an Ulster final before 47. It was only with the New York trip coming up that Cavan said, we'll actually train.
We won't take any chances here.
So they won the All-Ireland again in 52, in September 52, and then John Joe O'Reilly tragically died in November 52, and Cavan have never won an All-Ireland or contested a final since, amazingly. Tragically, sadly, whatever way we want to put it. But John Joe, I suppose, was the lost leader. Now, there was a lot of other factors at play. You had the rise of the Northern Counties in the late 50s, and you had a lot of depopulation in Cavan right through the 60s and 70s. So there's a lot of other factors at play, but yeah, while Kerry powered on, and Cavan and Kerry were peers at the time. You know, they were both, you know, A-listers in the GAA. They were blue chip counties, and they just took a different route after that. So Cavan sort of slipped back into the pack, and at times have gone very low in the standings. Whereas Kerry are Kerry, and they never go too far from the top.
Yeah, but they went back, Ciaran, 50 years later.
They did go back. I have a memory of this at the time that the GAA, I think at the time they used the excuse of it being a famine memorial again. But there was a coincidence of Kerry and Cavan being in the same division in the National League. And they played a National League game in Randall's Island, which was the athletic stadium. I think it's now called Ican Stadium. I think there was 7,000 or 8,000 people at it. You know, it was.
I think it was televised.
It was televised. It was, I think, which was unusual for a National League game at the time.
Very unusual, and it was a good timing as well because obviously Cavan had won an Ulster title after a very long wait in '97. Kerry were All-Ireland champions, so it kind of all fell. It all fell very nicely to go back 50 years later, didn't it?
Oh, for sure, because you could have picked out most years in the intervening years, and there would have been a big gap between the teams. And suddenly in '97, Cavan had a generational team by Cavan standards. Won Ulster, played Kerry in the All-Ireland semi-final, gave them a good game. Were only a point or two in it coming into the closing stages. I think Kerry won by 7. And then they got this trip. Now, there were a few of the Cavan players who retired after '97, and they stayed on for that first round National League game. They did right to get the trip out of it, I suppose. But there was a huge crowd went from Cavan, and there was a big Cavan and Kerry committee in New York organised that game. Giuliani threw the ball in. That was a huge event. It's still spoken about as a bit of a cultural touchstone in Cavan now, like the Cavan going to New York to play Kerry, albeit a National League game. But unfortunately, Maurice Fitz was absolutely in his prime, and he beat Cavan on his own in the All-Ireland semi-final and in that National League game.
And yeah, I mean, it would be a cultural touchstone, I suppose. And when you think about it, the chances of an All-Ireland final, I mean, it's never even been raised again, I don't think, in terms of going abroad. Okay, we've had All-Ireland finals in Thurles for the centenary, but I mean, an All-Ireland final will almost certainly never be lifted out of Croke Park again, Ciaran. Like, I think all things considered,
it's a different world now. You're tied into, 10-year ticketing plans for premium level and sponsorship engagements, and just the practicality of it now in that kind of truncated season we have.
Yeah, wouldn't happen.
It just wouldn't happen. But it's an amazing story in GAA history, and it surprises me. I meet people and you say to them there was an All-Ireland final in New York, and they're like, when the hell did that happen? It was just one of those things that I took for granted that everybody knew about.
That's the thing. There are gaps. There are gaps sometimes in people's knowledge of that. And look, it's a magical story. Paul, thanks so much for taking us through it so beautifully. It was fantastic. The stories, I can just say it again before we finish. The Fairy Tale in New York, not alone does it have one of the best titles ever conceived for any sports book, The Fairy Tale in New York. It's also just chock full of great stories, great yarns. If you've got an interest in Cavan GAA, you're going to love it. But I think even for anybody with an interest in GAA in general, the stories are great. It's captures a moment in time. And even for Kerry people, I think Kerry people sometimes, they learn almost as much about their own heritage and culture and why it means so much, why football means so much to them by reading about other teams' experiences against them. And I think that's very much the case with the Fairy Tale New York. So if you haven't read it, go get it. Paul, thanks so much for taking the time.
Not at all, Mick. My pleasure.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Ciaran.
That was great stuff. That was fantastic. There was stuff there about the 47. I thought I knew a bit about the 47 All-Ireland final. Like, turns out I didn't know a whole pile of that. No, that was great, Ciaran.
And we've got more to come. So for our Corja members, if you sign up today, you will get access to our second episode, which is on the internationalization of GAA2, I suppose, the Wembley tournament. And later this week, we'll be releasing our episode about the first time American football was played in Croke Park. So there's lots there if you sign up today. And you don't have to wait. If you sign up, you can hear them straight away. So our question for our next episode is, how did Paddy Cullen save a penalty at Wembley?
I'd say it's even a question, God rest him, the great Paddy Cullen never even thought he'd be asked. But here we are. So you get all of that and much more for less per month than a matchday program over at overthebar.club. You'll be supporting independent GA storytelling and getting more history, more things to debate, more things to talk about, more stories to tell, and hopefully plenty more answers.
So join us at overthebar.club. Like and share and subscribe, and we'll see you next time wherever you get your podcasts.